Hey guys, welcome to my second Let's Build. Like I said last week, today we're going to be making Kirito's offhand blade, the Dark Repulser. And like my two archer blades from before, you first start off by tracing out the image of your blade and then cutting it out on a piece of wood. This sword is a lot more complicated than Kanshou and Bakuya were, so the process is going to take a little bit longer. So don't be afraid to cut in from multiple points and just take your time while doing it. The most difficult part of this build by far were the decorative pieces on the hilt that made their way up the blade. As you can see here from this image I took from Google, which was actually the overall basis for this build, I separated the decorative pieces into 3 layers. So right here is what I ended up with. So the first layer is just going to be one solid cutout piece, and the next 2 pieces are going to have basically a pentagon cut into it, so you have enough room to put in the jewel later. Now, a word of warning to anyone who tackles something like this: if you're going to use a jigsaw like I did, take your time. This takes a lot of patience. Right now, these clips are sped up by, I think, over 1,600 times their original speed. So, word to the wise, just be very patient with it. And this here is basically what I ended up with. So 3 separate pieces that eventually will be glued together, and you're going to have 2 of these glued on either side of the blade. While trying to make such fine cuts with the jigsaw is bound to lead to a couple issues, I actually found that cutting these out, even if you do break it a little bit, usually it's salvageable. Just glue the pieces back together and then on top of each other, and add a couple weights on top of it. Usually seems to do the trick. Now, you may have noticed when I cut out the sword earlier that I was missing a couple pieces of the overall blade, particularly the part of the hilt that makes it a hilt. The only reason I did that is because I would have liked to cut it out as a full piece, but unfortunately, Rona didn't have any pieces of pine that were thin enough to basically make what I thought could pass as a sword, but while also being wide enough to cut out the full design of the sword. So I decided to basically cut out the blade part itself, and then, as you can see here, 2 triangular bits that we're going to glue on afterwards. So the next step is making your edge, and to me this is my favorite part of any sword build, because this is at least 75% of the sword. This here is where you forge out the overall shape of your blade. This is the first time here that I'm using a rotary tool to forge out my sword, and if I'm honest, my opinions on it are a bit mixed. Now, the pros about using a rotary tool is that you'll be able to carve out a rough shape much more quickly than your standard sander, and then you can just go over it with your sander afterwards. The con is that obviously that second part of having to sand over afterwards, just because no matter how slow you are, it's going to be a little bit rough if you use only a rotary tool. Now, another problem with it is that if you're not careful, if you're not really paying attention to what you're doing with the rotary tool, it has a tendency sometimes to jump, and you can actually cut in areas that you don't really want to, causing you to have to sort of fill it in after the fact with a fake wood or like a drywall sealant or something like that. But for me, I had pretty good results. So as you can see here, I started with the bottom part towards where the hilt is going to be, and just made my way all the way up towards the tip of the blade, the triangular bit here, working my way slowly, cutting out an overall groove, and yeah, then I'm just going to go over and sand it all afterwards. This process took, I want to say roughly maybe an hour to carve out each side, and then maybe roughly another hour or 2 to sand it all again afterwards. Easily the worst part of this build were the decorative pieces that go on the side of the hilt and the blade. When I cut these out with the jigsaw, just because I don't have the most delicate hand, I made a lot of errors, and each of the 3 pieces that make them are sort of misshapen. So I had to go in and do a lot of corrections, as you can see here with the rotary tool. And the rotary tool, again, you can get into so many of those nooks and crannies. So it really is a wonderful addition to your tool set if you don't have it. But unfortunately, you can't get everything with the rotary tool, so you're going to see here that I'm going to start using just a regular sandpaper to try and make a little bit more of a proper shape that I want. Unfortunately, just because, again, I have such a poor hand with the jigsaw, I had to do just as much addition to this piece as I had to do subtraction. So what you see here is basically I'm adding in a fake drywall or a drywall paste here, and that's basically going to fill in any grooves or any pieces here that I couldn't sand away. And once that's done, I'm going to sand it all down and then seal it with a coat of Mod Podge. The only reason why I'm going to seal it before you paint is because I tested it beforehand, and paint just goes on a little bit more differently to the drywall than it does to the wood. So once you're done with a piece of wood that's going to be the pentagram looking jewel in your hilt, you just want to sand that down just so you can slide that right into the decorative piece of the blade. If there are any gaps left over, just seal that with more drywall paste. Remember, you can sand away any excess once it's all dry. So right here, I should apologize. I didn't actually record adding in those triangular bits that make the overall hilt. But basically how I did that was I added a screw to the flat parts of each of those triangular bits, screwed those into the blade, and added into super glue for some good measure there. But right here is actually where I think I made the biggest mistake in this overall build. So these decorative pieces I've been talking so much about, what I should have done, reflecting back on it, is paint them separately and then glued on after the fact. I would have saved myself a lot of pain and hassle, because now, as you'll see, trying to paint it on as it's glued on right now, it's a pain in the butt. Trying to do it precisely on the line so that the paint doesn't fall onto the blade and vice versa, that was a pain in the butt, and to be honest, I don't even think I got it perfect. So definitely my advice would be keep those pieces separate. But since I didn't listen to my own advice, here's me attaching the handle, basically the same way I attach the triangular bits. And here you go, the entire sword right before it's about to be painted. And like I did last week with Kanshou and Bakuya, I'm just basically using some $3 to $4 paints taken from Michael's. And you're going to see here I actually pull up my phone quickly, just because I was a little bit unsure of whether or not I had gotten the right color. But after some close examination, yep, we're good to keep going. But with this, with these lighter colors, you're definitely going to have to do more than one coat. So don't worry if you can see some of the wood shining through. Like last week's swords, you definitely want to avoid putting on too much paint at once. Otherwise, it won't dry out properly. It won't dry out evenly. So yeah, definitely take your time. You will be rewarded for your patience after the fact. So basically right here, I think you guys will have a good idea of what I was talking about beforehand. When I get down to painting around that jewel area, painting those two colors is kind of unavoidable, so slowing down there kind of has to happen. But just picture the speed, so just have a look at the speed I'm going right now. Right now, that clip is sped up about 400%, so you can imagine just how slow I'm going in real life while doing that. And now imagine having to go that speed. Basically what you get down to where you have to get near towards the blade, where I'm doing right now. Yeah, that takes up a lot of time, so you would save yourself a lot of pain and effort if you painted these pieces separately and then glued them on after the fact. Unfortunately, the same can't be said about the blade's edge, which is going to be a painful process to paint no matter what you do. The only advice I got for you here is just take your time, go nice and slow, and again, just remember you can touch up anything you mess up afterwards. And the last part here I have to show you is just me painting the handle here, and once the paint's dry, I'm going to basically pull off that piece of tape to reveal the brighter colors underneath. There were a couple things here I omitted from the build, so if you guys have any questions, let me know. The reason I omitted it is just because recording with the DSLR proved to be very cumbersome and annoying, so if I do any more of these videos in the future, I'm going to hopefully do it with a GoPro. But thanks for watching, guys, and this was one of my favorite builds, despite the fact it didn't quite match up with Kirito's sword from the anime. But nonetheless, I think it is a fantastic prop and probably one of the best that I've ever made. So once again, thanks for watching, and until next week, I'm not quite sure what kind of video is going to be coming out next week. It might be a double Let's Play, because I don't think my paintball recording setup will be ready by then. But thanks for watching, guys, and until then, have a good weekend.